Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. In a failing economy that seems to be on a rebound, a lot of people are starting to think to themselves, is it really safe and secure to be working for somebody else? Especially as we're approaching midlife and we found that we invested in our company's IRAs, 401ks, or any other investments that all of a sudden they just simply scoop up and walk out the door with as they declare bankruptcy, leaving us destitute, having to work another 20, 30, or even 40 years. Perhaps the best solution is to really bite the bullet, open up our own business, maybe see if we can create some of that security that we were yearning for from a company that basically left us high and dry. On our program today, we're going to be talking about the dirty little secrets about being an entrepreneur. It's a new book that helps would-be entrepreneurs evaluate should I instead of could I own my own business. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today, business strategist Ms. Carol Roth. Carol, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Daniel, it is my pleasure here.
Now, if there is anything that a person will learn when they decide to start their own businesses, there is a lot of personal growth and change that really needs to happen if and when you become successful.
Yes, that is completely true, and it's funny, if you think about the phrase growing pains, growing is often painful. And so I say that, if you really want to be successful in business, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because business really is about risk-taking. It's about a roller coaster that has very high highs and very low lows, and you really don't know what's coming around the next turn. So it is not for the faint of heart, and for those who like to kind of be comfortable and know what's happening next and the predictability and the stability, definitely not exactly what happens in business.
Now, Carol, tell us about your story and how you began to, let your life path unfold in the direction that you have been going.
Yeah, so if you want to start from the beginning, I am the white sheep in a family of black sheep. Neither of my parents went to college. My sister sings in a heavy metal rock band, and somehow I ended up there too. And I was just very self-motivated, and so I went off to Wharton Business School, and my parents couldn't afford to send me, so I had to work through school and take out the loans. And so I was 22 years old, and back in the mid-'90s had $40,000 of college debt. And when you're at Wharton and you have $40,000 of college debt, two opportunities present themselves. If you like to really go deep and really just know everything there is to know about something, you become a management consultant. And if you have ADD and you want to do everything that there is and touch a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here, you become an investment banker. And so I have ADD. I became the investment banker. 16 years later, I am still advising companies.
Now, what's that been like, and what have you seen to be the consistencies in businesses when people start them or they're in business that they come running to you for strategies? Are there consistencies, or does it seem unique depending on the business and the individual?
So this is the interesting part, is the successes are very unique. Successes all have a different path, a different story, a little sprinkling of timing and luck. The failures all seem to boil down to the same issues. So I think you can draw a much better comparison of what not to do than necessarily, if I follow this person's plan exactly, that this is the 7 steps to success. And I think, Daniel, it's because we all have different definitions of what success means to us. And we all have different goals and objectives. So we can't follow, an exact path or take a magic bullet and expect that we're going to have the same outcome. And that's really why I wanted to provide more of a framework than a right answer, because I don't believe there is just one right answer, and I don't believe that one size fits all.
Well, that certainly would be contradictory to the self-help community when you look at all those books out there. There always seems to be the same 7 secrets or 10 principles that most of us apparently just don't know about. And it's like, well, 300 other self-help books seem to know the same thing that you're calling a secret.
Exactly. I always say the secret is called hard work. That's the secret. There you go. We've unlocked it, unleashed it today on this radio program.
Now, one of the things that I found fascinating, too, especially when it comes to starting business, whether it's you starting your own business or someone else, there seems to be this illusion, especially in the first year, maybe even in the first 6 months, is that the business should just immediately be replacing the income that you may be earning from a job.
Yes.
I'm sure you would definitely refute that.
Yeah, there is that perception. It's interesting. I think that the zeitgeist is that you have the ribbon cutting ceremony, confetti falls from the sky, there's a ticker tape parade, and people are lining up around the block for your goods and services.
Mm-hmm.
And that just isn't the case today. It may have been in 1930 when we coined the term American Dream, when there wasn't everything that you could ever think of. But now we have such a crowded market space that it really can take a couple of years just to get a foundation for your business. And so when you're getting the business set up, you're certainly not taking money out of the business because you might not be making any money to start with. And that's why, I think it's really dangerous when you look out there and you see technology has made it easier than ever to start a business, and you can start a business for just $100. Well, that may be true, but the reality is you need to have enough money not just to start the business, but to invest in the business and grow it to the point that it has this foundation, and also to live on in the meantime. And I think that's the part that people forget about, that it's so easy to start and that it's so easy I can do it too, but that doesn't mean that you'll be able to be successful immediately at it. Mm-hmm. I think if I can use the analogy of a lot of people, the way that they view marriage, they think about the wedding, right? They know exactly where they want to have it and what band they're going to hire, maybe what dress the bride's going to wear, and they're going to release 20 doves into the air when they walk out, and then they're going to go on the honeymoon and live happily ever after. But the reality is the work starts in when the honeymoon is over, and you have to invest in that relationship and work on it every single day. And so I make that analogy with a new business. I think a lot of people think about this starting it and getting it up and launched, and then ta-da, happily ever after. But that's when the work starts. That's when it's really, really difficult to execute, and that's what makes and breaks businesses.
Now, this day and age, excuse me, because of the failing economy that allegedly is on the rebound, of course, a lot of businesses have failed for whatever their reasons are, but there are also people that succeed during times like this. So what do you think is the difference, I guess, in the mindset, if you will?
I think a couple of things. I think, first of all, you have to be properly capitalized. You have to have enough money to endure the ups and downs. If you don't have a well-capitalized business, it's much more difficult to endure the tough times. But, I'm one of those people who really doesn't believe that you need to time the economy. I think it's impossible. It's like trying to time the stock market. Mm-hmm. And there are really great things about starting a business in tough times because you may be able to negotiate better payment terms with vendors or get a cheaper lease on a store or whatnot. And there are things that are a lot worse in tough times too, like the fact that your customers may not have enough money to patronize you or patronize you regularly. And so, there are these things that kind of balance out and kind of get flipped on their head when the economy is going well. So I think that the importance is to not necessarily think so much about the environment, but how does the environment impact your customer's need? If you are still servicing a customer need, a customer pain point, and doing it well, then I would kind of leave the economy out of the equation. Mm-hmm. That, to me, is the really telling point. So focus on the customer. Is this a product or service that the customer really needs? Am I uniquely qualified to bring it to this customer? And if so, then just make sure that you're properly funded and know that it may take a little while, maybe a little bit rockier to start the business. And hopefully, that if other people don't survive, that's more business for you in the long run.
Right. Now, here's something that a lot of people I've found do, and I remember when we first started our radio program and we brought on advertisers, they were trying to find ways that they could get people into the door. Well, what kind of offers do you think we should make here? Basically, going all the way to a free checkup if you were going into a naturopathic office. And I said, no, don't offer anybody anything for free until they become a regular customer. That's my opinion anyway. And I said, and it was funny because I was talking with my wife about this, and I said, what I find funny is the people that you give the most for free are the hardest customers to please. The people that tend to spend the most money are people that you just really don't need to bother with too much.
Amen.
Now, as an investment banker, am I telling the truth here? Because I've seen it. I've seen it like there was a restaurant that had the $7.99 per plate, television special. These people are pissing and moaning about the stupidest things, but yet you go into a restaurant and you're spending $35 per plate, and they're just as happy as a clam.
Yeah, you really attract what you put out there. And so if you put out the bottom of the barrel offer and you try to compete on price, then you're going to attract customers who care about price. And so I always say it's really important to focus on customer loyalty, and that doesn't mean bribery. It doesn't mean buy 9, get the 10th free.
Right.
What can you do to make your customer feel like a king? Because if you really create that bond and that loyalty to you, not to the discount, then those are the people who are going to be happy and who are going to patronize your business over and over again and who are going to tell all of their friends and colleagues. And so you never want to attract that kind of a customer. In fact, you probably want to get rid of them. And, in terms of the free, I have a great friend named Andrea Lee who's got a program called Pink Spoon Marketing. And it's really brilliant. She talks about Baskin Robbins and how they have those pink spoons for the ice cream. And she's willing to give that tiny little taste of ice cream for free, just like a little bit, just so that you know what it is that you're getting into. But then the key is you have to charge for the cone, and you have to charge for the hot fudge sundae. You can't just keep going. If the person's ready to buy after the taste, then great, they're ready to buy. Sell them the cone. But if they're not, if they want 10 different tastes, then you know that you're probably not attracting the right type of customer.
I agree. Stay home, would you?
and it's funny because there are a lot of businesses now who, are into firing some of their customers. And it's actually been a very effective strategy because there are not every customer is created equal, and not every customer is a good customer. If they're taking up more of your time than they are worth to you, then why do you want to have that person patronizing your business? And so sometimes it's very difficult, but sometimes you just have to say, you know what, I just don't think we're ever going to make you happy, and so you should probably, find another business to do business with.
Amen. Totally agree with that because they're just more of a headache than you deserve to have because you've already got enough of them.
Right, except if they're an influencer. This is the exception to the rule. So the exception is if your customer is Oprah, it doesn't matter. Then you still have to deal with your customer because there was a couple years back that Oprah went on a trip to Paris and she wanted to shop at the Hermes store. And so she goes up to the Hermes store, and it's about 6 o'clock, and knocks on the window, and they said, "Oh, I'm very sorry, ma'am, we're closed." And she said, "Oh, no, I understand, but I'm Oprah Winfrey. You may have heard of me before from the United States, and I'd like to come in and, buy half the store." And they said, "Yeah, we're really sorry. We're closed, and we have a private party tonight." Well, guess how many people Oprah Winfrey told that story to?
Well, imagining her broadcast network outreach, quite a few.
Yeah, so many millions. So, sometimes you have to look a little bit further and find out if they're an influencer and if they are not necessarily directly contributing a lot of money to you, but if they're influencing others to come in and spend or not spend a lot of money with you, that is also a valuable piece of information to have.
Now, here's what's interesting, too, when you consider a lot of people who decide to go out there and to be in business for themselves, Carol, and that is really taking stock in why you're going out and deciding that you want to be an entrepreneur in the first place. Now, you outline in your book 10 steps to put your business goals in check, and I like this because you didn't say 10 secrets. No. But one of the first things that was actually step number 1 for me was define your motivation. I thought that was an interesting step. Because, for one thing, you sometimes really don't tend to hear what a person's motivation or mission is when they're in business. And I think that's key to why you succeed when things really get troubling. If you don't have a good, strong mission, you're pretty much going to have some problems, pushing through the tough times. But here, the story I wanted to share real quick was about 15 years ago when I decided I wanted to start taking a look at really seriously pursuing radio. I went ahead and I did some informational interviewing about town, and one of the places I went to was the local television station where I was talking with a camera woman. So she came out and she met with me, sat down, and she just kind of looked at me for a minute. And she says, "Why do you want to do this?" as I was telling her what I was there for. And I said, well, that I wanted to go into radio, and she says, again, she just like she was seeing right through me. Why do you want to do this? And I said, well, because it's something that I always wanted to do. It seems like it would just be a lot of fun. I would really enjoy it. And I think I'd be good at it. And she goes, okay, good. Then I can sit down and talk with you, because if you were about to say you were going to go in for money or fame or anything like that, I wouldn't have even bothered with you. But it was the difference between why I do what I do and what my motivation for doing it is, and that's key. Talk about why that's important.
It's so key, and I think, if you think about having that goal and that motivation and what it is that you want, it's really critical to know where you want to go to figure out a path to get there. If you don't know where it is you're going, how do you plan the route? Mm-hmm. And so this actually came from my own experience with my mother. So my mother was a creative type, and back in the early 1980s, she pioneered one of the first gift basket companies. Now, Nowadays, everybody does the gift basket thing, but back in 1980, this was super novel.
Right. And
she was really, really creative, and she just kind of made these, and people said, these are great. You could make money from doing this. And she said, oh, yeah, okay. And as more people were interested, she created a business from it, but she never had a purpose. And what happened was that 10 years went by, and she finally sat down to look at what was going on, and she found that she was making $10,000 a year, which when you divided it by the 50 hours a week and the 50 weeks a year she was working, she was making $4 an hour. When I was babysitting for more than $4 an hour at the time. And so I think that happens to so many people who do get enamored with these ideas, or they're very creative, or they're following a passion, but they don't really set these intentions and goals for their business. And so what happens is they just kind of do, and it doesn't go anywhere. They end up on a treadmill, and they're investing so much of their own time and their own money and their own effort into something, yet there's no plan to actually get anywhere. So you just get up on this treadmill, and that's how so many entrepreneurs end up overwhelmed and overworked.
Mm-hmm. Now, step number 2, you say, is say hello to your new boss. Who is that?
So probably my favorite myth in the world, Daniel, is that you get to be your own boss.
Right. You get to work your own hours.
Yeah, you are in charge. All right, so let's frame this. When you worked at a job, you had, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen people that you reported to that had any say over if you were hired, if you were fired, how much you got paid, your uniform, all those things that related to your work. Now, when you go out and you start a business, number one, you have to report to every single customer. So that means dozens, hundreds, or if you're lucky, thousands of people, all with their very own agenda, who care about themselves, who you now have to report to. Because if they don't like the decision you make, they don't patronize your business, you don't get a paycheck, you don't get any money, you are quote-unquote fired. So basically, yes, you can pick out your uniform if it's pleasing to your customers. You can work the hours you want if your customers say it's okay. You can put the kinds of products and services you want onto the market if someone's willing to pay for it. So they are the number one boss that you have. And then if you have employees, you have to take care of their needs before your own. Mm-hmm. If you have investors or lenders, they certainly will tell you what to do. If you have a store, your landlord's going to set rules for you. If you have a franchise, the franchise parent company is going to set tons of rules for you. So all of a sudden, you've got all of these bosses, and you're actually at the bottom of the totem pole with no upward mobility. Mm-hmm. So the reality is you do not get to be the boss. You are not in control, and you do not have the freedom that you think you have.
Yeah, like one of the myths that you talk about in entrepreneurship is that you believe you'll have more time for friends, family, and hobbies.
Yes.
Nonsense.
Yes, all of your free time from 11 to 11:30 p.m. at night. Mm-hmm. If you're lucky. Yeah, it's amazing. I think there's just so much underestimation that goes along with it because it sounds really sexy and glamorous. And we do kind of see in the media some of these really fantastic success stories, but what we don't realize, and you being a media personality can probably attest to this, is that the stories you hear about are the ones that are remarkable. If they happened every day, no one would be talking about them.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, that's what I would always tell people. It's basically it's a marathon that has no end, really. I mean, there's
Right.
the finish line and your satisfaction that you're doing it, but that you arrive, it just really doesn't happen. And when you talk about what I believe you're describing is, it was an overnight success. This person created a paperclip and now they're multimillionaires. And I think that really what bothers me about that story is that it does two things. A, it gives people a false illusion about what it means to start and maintain a business.
Yeah.
But most importantly, for those who fail, who feel that they've taken these steps, that let's say they follow this paperclip guru, for instance, who spits out one of these books with a bunch of secrets, is that they do everything they say they're supposed to do, but yet they fail. And I see that happen especially in companies like network marketing companies.
Yes.
Follow these steps, but 10 years later, they're making $125 a month. Well, how come this guy's making $15,000 a month after 6 months? Something's wrong here about that picture.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's really not doing anybody. It's doing everyone a disservice, really, to put that information out there. And I always say there's a difference between possibility and probability. It's very possible that I could be the ruler of an island nation. And it is also possible that instead of marrying my husband, I could have married a supermodel. But at the end of the day, these are possibilities, not probabilities, and I wouldn't invest my life savings. If I did that, then you should send me to Gamblers Anonymous.
Right.
And so, yes, there's always going to be some dumb luck thing, but that is not the norm. And so you want to make sure that you really are doing whatever you can to stack the odds in your favor. I was just having a discussion with a reporter earlier today, and we were saying with the failure rates in business, with 9 out of 10 people failing, or we'll call it failing to succeed, because everyone likes to debate if somebody closes up shop because they weren't making a living, is that really failure? Well, I don't know. I just know they didn't succeed. But if you have a 90% rate within 5 years, I have better odds to go take my money and bet it on black in Vegas, right? Like
right.
That's 48% or something like that. So if you're going to enter into this, you should really, really be prepared and not just assume that because it worked in this particular manner for one person, it'll work that way for you. And then the other thing is that a lot of these overnight sensations are really overnight media sensations. They're not overnight successes.
Right.
I have a friend, Jason Wu. Jason dressed Michelle Obama for the inaugural with the inaugural gowns for the inaugural parties back when Obama was elected. And everyone said, oh, this young wonderkind, he's an overnight sensation. Well, he's been working for 10 years at that point, and he had really been busting his butt. And it just now all of a sudden this one thing happened and everybody discovered him, but that doesn't mean he hadn't been working really, really hard for a decade prior. And because he was young, that assumption was, even more strong. And so I think, too, you have to kind of ask yourself, are you getting the full story? Do you have all of the details here? And in fact, one of the tests that I like to give people is that I tell them a story about one of my my clients that sold his business for $20 million. And I said, are you impressed? And every single time they said, yeah, I'm very impressed. I said, well, you shouldn't be. He paid $50 million for the company.
Well, not to mention, as Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad Poor Dad would say, well, he sold an asset.
Yeah.
That's something that puts money in your pocket.
But he paid $50, and then it was, 10 years later it was worth $20, so he lost $30 million. I didn't tell you that. I just told you the sexy part of the story, and you thought that was awesome. And so sometimes there's just more to the story than you actually know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, step 3 you talk about is evaluate how well you work with others. And this is something that our listeners, if you're thinking about going into business, you seriously need to take seriously.
Seriously. Yeah, it's there's a, particularly in today's day and age when technology makes it easy for us to all be mobile and work from different locations and interact.
And disconnected.
Yes, and disconnect and not disconnect in some cases. It's there are people who just don't like to work with other people. Their coworkers smell funny, and they're sick of their boss, riding their behind all day long, and they really want to get a break from people. But the reality is, as we kind of touched on before, when you start a business, you still have to work with people. You still have people as your customers. You still have people as your service providers. You cannot get around it until dogs, cats, and trees step up and start making some money and can start patronizing your business. You're probably stuck with people.
Yeah.
So, again, if you're running away from this problem, are you really running into a situation where you probably now exponentially increase the number of people that you're touching?
Amazing. Now, your responsibilities are very much something that you have to pay attention to, because a lot of times as people start a business, they say, well, this is my company, this is the way things are going to go, and what I say goes. Well, if you're going to build a team, you better have a better mindset than that.
Absolutely. And I talk about this in the entrepreneur equation. When you start a business, you have stakeholders in your life. And, for most people, that's their immediate family. It could be a spouse or a partner, and it could be children. And because your business commands so much of your financial resources as well as your time and your effort, you may be ready to prioritize the business, but your family may not be ready for you to prioritize the business. And the unfortunate thing is that you can only make one thing your number one priority. You can't make two things your number one priority. And so you have to kind of figure out, is your family going to be okay with this? If you have to take some of your investment money that might be used for the family trip or to send, your kid, to college or whatever it is, and you have to invest that in the business, is that going to be okay with them? If you're missing an important family event because you have a work emergency, are they going to be okay with it? And if your family doesn't buy into it, it's going to be very hard for you to really invest fully into it. And so that may be a situation where, entrepreneurship could be for you, but maybe not right now. And maybe you need to delay it to a time when your kids are a little bit older, when your financial situation's a little bit better, or when your spouse or partner has, found a hobby to occupy their time, so that you really can make this a top priority for you. And so you really have to put that into the entire valuation.
Now, in step 5, it was really interesting because it reminded me of the days of the restaurant business when you would see people who would go from being bussers or dishwashers, they'd cruise up the ladder, and eventually they become assistant managers and managers. And step 5, you talk about how you look at your management and industry experience.
Yes.
And what's interesting and important about the thing that I was talking about just before step 5 here is that they tend to believe because they know how to do the job that they can manage people well. And it's like, you don't understand. These are two different aspects here.
Yes. It's just because you're good at producing a good, or just because you're good at doing a certain service, doesn't mean that you have what it takes to run a business, because you have to do everything now. You don't get to just do that very one limited thing. So, yeah, I think the restaurant's a great example of that. And, it's really interesting, Daniel, if you take a step back, there are a lot of people, at least in the scenario that you talked about, at least those people have had some relevant experience. Restaurants is a favorite one of mine, where people will come to me all the time and say, have you ever worked in a restaurant because you want to open one? And they go, no, but I eat in restaurants all the time. And it's like, yeah, if you thought that, working as an assistant manager wasn't good experience, eating in one is definitely not good experience. And so, I always encourage for people to actually go in and to try and work in these businesses on somebody else's dime, to at least get a flavor for it.
Right.
And, it's something you can do on nights and weekends, or you can even take 3 months out of your life and go and spend some time doing this and put your magnifying glass on the business and really approach it as if you were the owner, and dig up those secrets and see if you like it and see if you're good at it and see if you can get promoted and work up the ladder. And so many people just don't do that and go, oh, my God, I never thought of that. And inevitably, every person I send out to go do that comes back and goes, God, I really hate that. And I say, yeah, I'm glad you didn't invest 6 figures in opening one. Yeah, I'm really glad. And so it's just amazing to me that when people get these ideas and they get enamored with what could be, that they don't spend the time to go test it out before writing the check. It's amazing. I mean, you would never buy the car without taking the test drive, right?
Right.
So why would you do the same thing for a business when you're risking your money and you're risking your time, you're risking your effort? I mean, it's such a lesser commitment to just, give up nights and weekends or to set 3 months aside and try it out in some capacity to gain experience. Or if you don't want to go work in someone else's business, what about testing it out on a small scale before you go blow all your money? Keeping on the restaurant lines, do you know the theme restaurant, the Rainforest Cafe?
Right.
The Rainforest Cafe, the guy who built that, he actually built a prototype of the restaurant in his backyard before he built the restaurant. And he had people come through it and say, do you like this? And he tested out the recipes, and he actually really, invested just a limited amount of money to see if this was something that was really going to fly before they invested the millions and millions of dollars to build out the first restaurant. So it's a really great idea to test it out on a small scale first and really get some level of experience and get some feedback and find out if this is, in fact, viable for you.
I know one of the things that was asked of me one time is, if you were going to start a food cart, what would it be? And I said, hot dogs. I said, why? I said, because hot dogs sell no matter where you're at.
and they're easy, right?
And they're very easy, exactly, and you can sell a lot of them. It's just because I happen to know someone who started a food cart, and one of the premises she had on there was the world's best spring rolls. And I said, that's fine if that's what you believe, and maybe they are the world's best. But I said, you need more of a unique approach that nobody else is taking. And she says, what do you mean? And I said, why don't you put the world's most unique? Get that curiosity going. Everybody's heard that, they've got the world's best of something,
Right.
But of course, nobody ever listens to you, and here they are a couple of years later kind of struggling. But the other thing, too, is on your steps is that you take stock of whom you know. Now, I think this is really key because for the listeners out there, if you're starting a business, I think one of the biggest things you could do is information interview about what you're interested in pursuing, because It's amazing how many people, even after you get started, will be there to help you. It really is. Instead of trying to think you could just do it all on your own, really engage and, as you said, take stock of who you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that people really like to protect their ideas. I've got an amazing idea, and I can't tell you. It's a secret because it's brilliant. And the challenge is that we're in an economy and in a marketplace where we have pretty much everything we could ever want or need. And even if it is unique and brilliant, it probably doesn't matter because it's indirectly competing for our time and our attention with something else. So the best thing you really can do is, instead of trying to protect it, is get feedback. Get other people to buy in. People love to talk about their experiences, what worked, what didn't. People love to give you their own thoughts on what you're doing. And by the way, if you get people to buy in and think that they have a stake in it, then they really get excited and start telling other people. So I think that you are just dead on right, that instead of keeping everything to yourself, you should go out and really start having conversations. And it is so easy. I mean, it's the number one thing I think people like to talk about is themselves. So if they have relevant experience, they're going to be willing to share that. And if you ask for help and are really clear about what you need, then people, most of the time are really helpful. It's just that a lot of times they don't know what it is that you want, and they can't read your mind, so they can't actually help you. So I think it's really critical because we cannot build businesses alone. When you build a business alone, it becomes a job, and there's only 24 hours in your day, and you need to do other things, and that means you're never really able to create equity value or even go on vacation because it's all about you, and if you're not there, the business isn't working anymore.
Now, Carol, you bring up an interesting point, too, that we actually hit on earlier when we talked about the overnight successes that the media tends to glorify as though it's the norm. And this could be, I guess, put it under one of your business myths, is that as you decide that you want to share your idea with other people, the media has also been responsible for sharing stories or telling stories about people who have shared a great idea, somebody grabbed it, ran off, they became a multi-millionaire, and this guy's sitting here broke going, why did I ever do that in the first place? But as we see, that is just not the norm.
It's not the norm, and what I always say is that the idea actually isn't even valuable anymore, it's the execution.
Right.
There are so many people who have the same darn ideas, but that execute them differently with different outcomes. I don't know if you're a fan of mixed martial arts, but there's a very premier league called the UFC, and the UFC was actually owned by a group that almost made it go bankrupt, and then the current owners bought it, invested in marketing, changed the flavor of it, and it's now worth $1 billion, according to Forbes.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you say, okay, you have the exact same company, not even just the same idea, the exact same company that was worth $0 and $1 billion, how much is the idea worth? Well, it's clearly not the idea. It's what they did with the idea afterwards. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not the one to do something, your idea alone in today's marketplace doesn't mean anything. And it's something that I've had to make peace with. I was one of those, in college that always had the book of ideas, and I, scribbled that stuff in my notebook, but I never really, had the wherewithal or the desire to pursue any of them. Mm-hmm. So if you're not going to invest in it and you're not going to execute on a day-in, day-out basis, it doesn't count.
You actually bring up some really interesting points to make. The first one on the UFC, an interesting backstory on that, is that originally as it was marketed, and I remember the UFC in its early years, it was marketed to be this brutal, bloody thing.
Yes.
When that's far from what it really was. They just didn't understand it, I think.
Yes.
And that caused a lot of ire of politicians, and that's why it became banned in the United States.
Yes.
When in fact, I think it's less bloody and brutal than WWF is. And here this thing's launched and went crazy.
Yeah.
But here's an interesting backstory also. I remember years ago, I can't remember the author now, but he was the original guy, allegedly, that went around the country doing seminars about nothing down, being able to go out and buy homes and properties with no money, okay? Yeah. So he's conducting these seminars, and he's doing real well, and all of a sudden a guy by the name of Mr. Sheets comes along and says, why fly out or go to where this guy's at? Just buy my program on tape, and here's the books, and you can go ahead and stay at home. Blew this guy right out of the water.
Right.
And he admitted, he said, I didn't change my business model to fit the needs of the customer.
Yes.
So he said, I started licking my wounds, and then he changed the dynamic and became number one again over this guy. So see, it was the same idea that had been cruising along for 20, almost 30 years. It was stolen, and then it was taken back and improved on. So it doesn't really matter. It's just, as you said, the execution of the idea is what's most important.
Yeah, and that brings up a really amazing point about ideas that are brand new, too. One of the things, if you actually do have an idea that's incredibly novel, a lot of times that's a really bad business to go into because you have to spend your money educating the consumer as well as getting the consumer to buy. If the customer doesn't understand the need for the product and you're the one that has to do it, it is much, much more expensive. So a lot of times it's better to be the second or the third or the fourth guy who waits for someone else to educate the consumer, and then you come in and you do it smarter or you do it better or you do it cheaper or whatever your advantage is, and you actually then are the one that ends up making the money because you didn't have to invest in the education. And if you think about something as simple as Google was not the first search engine. Mm-hmm. They let everyone else go out there and teach everybody what a search engine was and make the mistakes, and then they said, okay, how can we do this better? And what do we all use and talk about? We talk about Google. So it's, the whole idea of being the brilliant idea and the novelty isn't all that it's cracked up to be, really.
Yeah, sort of like the idea that Blockbuster is going to go ahead and start screwing you even though they have no late fees, but we're going to charge you for the movie after 5 days of it being out, and then Netflix says, hey, go ahead and keep the movie as long as you want.
Exactly.
We'll mail it to you.
Yeah.
Gee whiz, I don't see any Blockbusters hardly anymore. I wonder what happened there.
It is true, and the unwillingness to adapt, and also the person that has to be the education. Yeah, so yeah, you've got to really stop focusing so much on the ideas and just keep executing. And then I think, as you said, keep an eye on the market because it changes really, really rapidly. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you get so used to doing it your way that someone else says, hey, there's a better way of doing this.
For those of you just joining us, we're talking about the book, The Entrepreneur Equation. Our guest here on the Beyond 50 radio program, Carol Roth, and we were just outlining, or at least we're going through 10 things that you want to consider before you decide to become an entrepreneur. And I'll tell you, Carol, this one here I think is the biggest one you really need to assess, and that is, what is your relationship with money? This is the difference whether you're going to be out there with a cup begging for change or you're going to be designing the cups and enjoying a nice lunch over in Tahiti. And believe me, because when we first got started, doing our program, the first thing we got a hold of was a woman who could actually share with us what it means to keep the books and to basically pay attention to the money. And it's interesting, you sit in a room with, say, 10 adults. They could be 50 years and older. How many of you played the game of Monopoly? How many of you were really good about winning it? How come you're not applying those same strategies to a real business? That game had value.
Yes. It really did, and I think that there are these three types of money sicknesses that I call them, and the first affliction that you could have is no money, and if you don't have any money, it's really hard to make money. You can't invest in a business if you don't have it. We talked about it earlier, to start, to sustain, to live on. So that kind of makes you have to refocus and think about what you can do to get the money first before you think about investing in the business. But then there are the people who are clearly very frivolous with their money. And if you're really into expenses instead of investments, you might not be very well suited for business, because the key in business is to invest your money in a way that produces a return. And if you're spending all of your money on really cool office equipment, or you want to make sure you've got the plasma in the office and crazy money on the website because you want the flashiest one out there, you might need to have somebody else come in and put the reins on you a little bit. And then there's the one that affects me the most, which is I call El Cheapo, and it's the money sickness where your parents told you that if you didn't save every penny, you'd end up living in a box in Chicago under Lower Wacker Drive. And so if you're somebody who has such a fear of risking money, as I did early on in my career, it's very, very difficult to make intelligent investment decisions in your business, because it becomes very emotional for you. And when you're emotional, you never make good decisions. And so if you're somebody who has this kind of funny fear of investing money and you're worried about losing it, that can actually really be a handicap, because then you never put forth enough money to give your business a chance to grow. I have a couple clients that are in that situation right now, and it's really unfortunate because they really need to hire people to get sales, but they're like, well, if we hire people and they don't produce anything in a year, we're going to be out of business. And it's like, well, if you don't hire them in a year and a half, you're going to be out of business, so what's the difference? At least give yourself a chance here, people. And so I think you really do need to assess what your relationship is with money, and are you somebody who can be comfortable in making these kind of objective decisions about money that relate to your business.
Now, Carol, on this next step here, I just wonder, I'm sure that it may seem to the listeners as I say this, well, don't you see the common sense in it, but I think it's kind of got a gray area, and that is assess your personality type.
Yes. It does, because I think that a lot of times we don't tell ourselves the truth, or that we think that we're good at things that we're really not so great at. So I've come up with a very scientific and very objective test called Are You Santa Claus or Are You an Elf? And basically, if you think about Christmas, Santa is the one that orchestrates the big vision, and the elves are the one that execute it. And they need Santa's direction in order to figure out what to do, and Santa has to, wear all the hats and do all the networking and be the face of Christmas, and by the way, if Christmas goes wrong, he's the one that gets blamed. So I say, look at the things that you like to do, that you're good at. Do you like to manage people, or do you like to be managed? Are you someone who can take the ball and run with it, or do you really like to execute something specifically with really specific directions? Do you like to network, or do you like to be behind the scenes? Go through all of these things and say, is it more like Santa, or am I more like an elf? And if you're more like Santa, you're probably better suited for entrepreneurship than somebody who's an elf who probably shouldn't go into business or quit their day job.
I agree. Now, we've talked about this through a lot of these steps here, and I think this is a very important one, and this would be the next step, which is examine the marketplace and your competition. That is so key. As a matter of fact, I remember Philip Fisher, who was considered to be at least 20% of the influence on how Warren Buffett would invest his money in businesses, would talk about if you really want to understand a company you're about to invest in, definitely go to their competitors to find out more about them because they will talk.
Yes.
And you can see how this could be such a crucial step in the research that we hope that as you decide to be an entrepreneur, for the listeners out there, that you don't sit and research it to death until you think it's safe to jump into the water. But this is a really important step to examine the marketplace and your competition.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at the good competition because those are the people who are going to be slugging it out with you, and they may have more resources than you, and you may identify something that they're not doing as well that you can beat them at their own game. But then there's another aspect of this, and then there's the bad competition. And bad competition are the people who are just total amateurs who are out there who are poisoning the well. They're turning off people to your industry, or they're creating so much noise that even if you have a great message, you can't break through, or it costs you a lot more to break through because of these yahoos that are there. So you really have to look at the whole competitive landscape because that's probably the biggest issue that faces businesses today is that there is so much noise. It's so much harder to reach a customer and to keep their interest than it ever has been before. And so you have to look at not only the good people who are really going to make you step up your game, but these lousy people who are just going to make a lot of noise and everyone's going to go, you know what, I don't even want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. So it is really a critical piece of the evaluation to spend a lot of time on competition.
Carol, if you can you give us an example of businesses that you've seen that pollute the water with what's really good out there?
I can give you a personal example that relates to me. So, I am in the business advice giving space. And some of
that's almost enough said right there.
Yeah. So the folks who are out there in the market who I run up against a lot of times, I do not often feel are of the highest quality. And the thing that really kills me is that I get courted all the time by really high-profile websites and media outlets to write for them or to move my blog onto their platform. And then I'll sit and I'll look at their legal agreements. And the legal agreements will say things that would actually have you in breach of the agreement the day that you sign it. For example, there's one very high-profile media outlet that says, okay, we're going to have you run your blog, and the content that day, we're going to also run it on our site the same day. And then you can keep your people, but we'll also give you this extra exposure. Okay, sounds great. Well, I read the agreement, and the agreement says, and we have an exclusive right to the content for 5 days. You can't publish it anywhere else for 5 days. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense. You just told me I could publish it on my site the same day. They said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, that's what the agreement says, and I'm a business advice giver. If I sign this, I'm going to look like an idiot. And they're like, yeah, no, we know, but that's how the lawyers like it. So I have colleagues, quote unquote, or others out there who actually sign these agreements
over
and over and over again and are giving business advice. I actually had my favorite agreement was one where there was like a typo that said, like, don't do this within written consent, and it meant without written consent. And they're like, wow, we've been using this for 10 years, and nobody's ever pointed that out before. And I'm like, these people are giving you business advice? Like, what is going on? They're not even reading the legal contract. So that's a great example of where, I'm missing out on an opportunity because there are a bunch of other yahoos who are willing to just sign anything. And so, you have to be particular and wait for the right opportunities where you're not in breach of the agreement the day you sign it.
Yeah, just always make sure that it ain't the verbal agreement that you're going to agree to. It's the one that you write on that you agree to. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, amazing stuff. I remember when we first launched our show at a local radio station, I looked, and we even had a lawyer look over the contract, and I said, I want to be clear about one thing and one thing only. We totally own all the content of this show, and we can do whatever we want with it. Okay? And he looked over, he says, that's exactly what this contract says. You're just buying an hour of time. Now, what was funny about that particular thing, because I had it clearly in writing, was down the road we ended up with a new account executive as we decided to buy another hour of time on the station. And she started stepping in and saying, well, you can't really use this recorded program anywhere else. And I said, well, it's my understanding that I can. She says, no, you can't. I said, well, as a matter of fact, I legally had the contract evaluated just for that very thing. If I want to go and play this show somewhere, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And from now on, quit having your engineer put your station logo within the whole thing so you can claim ownership, because it's not your show, it's ours. We're just brokering your time.
Right.
And this was the same person that really tried to make a stupid move by saying, here's what we'll do, since we decided to drop that hour because we didn't want anything to do with that person anymore, is that she had said, well, let's go ahead and broker this deal, for an extra $200 or whatever it was. We'll have the engineer go through to be sure that your CD is ready so that you can use it any way you want. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? How can you stand there and say something that stupid? And I said, no, we just don't want to deal with you anymore.
Well, and it brings up such an important point, because a lot of people will have a great relationship with someone and they will do a deal on a handshake, or they will have something written but say, oh, well, we know that this means something else because you have this relationship. But those people turn over. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when that person's going to be replaced. And then when the next person comes in, they're not going to know what you guys said and agreed to, and so you better have that in writing to fall back on. And I always find the people who put everything down in writing and make it very clear up front don't have the issues down the road. It's when you say, oh, yeah, no, it's great, oh, don't worry, we're all on the same page, is when later on not everybody's on the same page. So I think it's so critical that you do that. Some people think that you're being fussy, you're silly, or that's so. I'm old school. I don't do it that way. Well, maybe not, but it really does clarify, because even something as simple as I mean marketing, and you think I mean marketing and PR. Sometimes one word means something to someone, and it means something very different to someone else. So I think the more clear you can be in a written format up front, the better for you.
Especially if it comes to any friends or family who decide they want to help have a stake in getting your business launched.
Oh, boy.
Give you an example there, and not that that's one related to business and family, which I wouldn't even bother asking my parents for any money to get a business started. That's too many heartaches, I think. But, like, for instance, there was a time that my son was with me, and he was staying, and I said, here's the rules. And to be sure that you understand what these rules are, you're going to sit down and you're going to write them out on a piece of paper in front of me as I tell you what they are, okay? So sure enough, it wasn't even half of a day. He was already breaking one of them. And here's what I loved, and I'm sure that you've seen this thing as well. Well, I thought you said.
Right.
Oh, really? Okay, well, let's get out that sheet that we had you work on earlier. What does it say here that you signed? And he says, oh, okay, see, it's funny how all of a sudden things can get fuzzy and unclear, but if you don't have it in writing, then what proof do you have?
That's a brilliant story. I love the fact that not only was it in writing, but you made him put it in writing. So it's not even that he could claim that he didn't read it, because he actually had to write it down.
Right.
You have an extra safeguard built in there.
Exactly. And then he couldn't fall back on the, well, I thought you said C.
Right, exactly.
No, it's what you wrote.
Perfect.
You can't test it out on your kids, then you don't belong being in business.
That's right. That goes back to the experience. We test it out on a small scale. Make sure you test it out on your kids.
In fact, that's the next and final step, is test your scalability. What does that exactly mean?
All right, so scalability, it means, can you really grow this beyond yourself? And for every dollar that you're putting in, or every hour that you put out, are you getting more back? Because if you don't, if it is really just about you, you've really created just a job for yourself. And then if you're going to create a job for yourself, really, do you want to invest your money for creating a job yourself? And do you have to work more hours with more stress for the same or less pay than if you just work for somebody else? So if you really want to start a business, you have to think about something that is scalable, that can get beyond you, that really it doesn't have to be entirely dependent on you for until the end of time. And if you don't want that, then you have to ask yourself, does a business make sense, or am I better off working for someone else where I can hang it up at 5 or 6 o'clock and then enjoy the rest of my night? Because, as we talked about earlier, when you have a business, that doesn't really happen, because not only do you have to, earn the revenue, but there are all these administrative things that you need to do that don't directly produce any money. So I think scalability is really, really important. And, when I say that when the people test out these businesses on the side, one of the important things to figure out in scalability, is there a repeat purchase? Because let's say you like to bake cupcakes, and you get every one of your friends and family members to buy some cupcakes from you, and you go, oh, my God, I have this viable business, and we can really grow this. And then they never buy them from you again. And the reality is that sometimes people just do things to be nice to you. So are they calling you the next day at midnight going, I'm really jonesing for cupcakes, or you have them delivered in my office tomorrow, or were they doing it just to be nice? Mm-hmm. And so you really have to kind of cut through what's reality to find out if this is truly a viable, scalable business.
And the other thing, too, if you can, define for our listeners what it means to own a business.
I think to own a business means that you have to invest your money and your time and your effort into an entity. And the way that I like to define a business is something that actually has value separate from you. There are a lot of businesses that don't. There are a lot of businesses that look like hobbies or jobs. But if you're really having a business, you want to create something that either can be sold or that you can pass on, or that you can go on vacation for 2 weeks and will really still keep going. And it is a really difficult thing to do. You have to be working at this day in and day out. You've got to stay nimble. You've got to invest time, money, emotions, energy, and you have to, at the end of the day, service the customers because they're the ones that are paying you.
Carol Roth here on the Beyond 50 radio program. We're talking about the entrepreneur equation and sending out the message to our listeners. If you've got that idea out there, or you're getting just sick and tired of the person you're working for, and you think, hey, why don't I escape and start my own business? Well, we've certainly given you a lot to chew on and think about as you decide to get started. Now, Carol, what would be, I guess, your biggest piece of advice for people out there? I remember years ago when I was watching Famous Amos and his cookies, and he was talking about how so many people have a great idea and they research it to death, but they never get started. What would be your key thing to tell our listeners out there?
Well, other than that they should buy the entrepreneur equation and do all the exercises in the book, but I think the reason they should do that is that it all boils down to risks and rewards. Mm-hmm. That you really need to, if you're going to invest in doing something, the payoff at the end of the day, financially and quality of life as well, needs to greatly outweigh the risk that you're taking on. If it doesn't, don't do it. It makes no sense to trade $49,000 for the chance to possibly make $50,000 a year. That is a bad trade. You would never do that on a game show. Monty Hall would smack you upside the head if you made that deal and picked that curtain. And so don't do that in business. Really do your research and figure out, am I making a good trade? Because just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should.
Now, Carol, if you can, give our listeners a website out where they can find out more about the entrepreneur equation and see if they really have what it takes.
Yes, so the best place to connect with me is at carolroth.com. And if you click on book, it will take you over to the entrepreneurequation.com where they can actually download a free chapter of the book with the foreword by Michael Port. And if they've heard enough and they know they're ready to get in on that assessment, the book is launching March 22nd, but has started to kind of leak out everywhere. It's on Amazon. It'll be at Barnes & Noble and 800 CEO Read and everywhere that fine books are sold.
Be looking forward to a copy of mine as well.
Absolutely. I know that you will chuckle along the way.
Absolutely. Well, Carol Roth, thank you for joining us here on the program. We love to bring on, when you watch mainstream media when it comes to businesses, they're always talking about investing, which is important, but they talk about things that really don't give you the grassroots, roll up your sleeves and know what you're about to jump into. And we really try to bring out the real true things that people actually will experience when they decide to make a move like this. And thank you for being on the program today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Again, the book is The Entrepreneur Equation. Our guest, Carol Roth, and you can find out more about that at carolroth.com. I'm Daniel Davis. We thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50 with a 50. We have a free weekly e-newsletter that goes out. Sign up for that as well. Also be sure to visit us on our blog. We certainly archive our shows and have great hot links, including this one we've been doing here today. We thank you for tuning in. This is Beyond 50. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.